So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and it has come to my attention that we've done quite a lot of free-for-alls lately, so I think it's time to sort of reboot and just sort of recycle the type of battles that I'm doing. And we'll start off with a 1v1, and then I think we'll move into the Dol Amroth Siege, hopefully if I have the time to do it, that I've been sitting on for a little while now. And this is actually one that I've had for a little while as well. This one was sent to me by Kuro about a couple of weeks ago, so it is a bit of a sign that I've got quite a lot of battles that I can use in the backlog. But he's going to be facing off against Rules 1, and of course they're playing as Rune and Cardlin respectively. So we'll start off with Kuro's army, and we've got a lot of golden boys on display today, including actually, be interesting to see how these chariots get on, the Runic War chariots. Of course, in the last battle we saw how effective the Linden chariots could be, and of course the Runic ones are very much similar in the way that they can plough through enemy lines. The difference being that the missile attacks they do are of longer range, but they are not AP and they don't pack the same punch as the Linden chariots. We've got some E-Strong crossbows, very good sort of zoning out cavalry tool, I find. All crossbows are like this, but obviously Rune, these crossbows are cheaper than most, but obviously they do pay for this in the way that they are very easy to skirmish down. Very similar to the Corsair crossbows in that regard, only they cannot hide, so of course they are going to be very vulnerable to that sort of thing. We've got a lot of E-Strong hunters here at the front if we just go down this line. The lowest tier of Runic Archer, and he's definitely going for a sort of quantity-based approach here. And against Cardlin, this is not a bad way of doing things. There's also some stakes here in the middle, deployed by the unit just in behind, which we'll get onto in a moment. But the Eastron Hunters should be able to trade relatively evenly with quite a lot of Cardlin's archers. Going for this sort of more numbers-based approach is a pretty good idea for skirmishers, if you are able to do so. Most of the evil factions can. Just in behind, we do have the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen, which is interesting. They are definitely a very unique unit on the battlefield. Is this the General's bodyguard unit? I believe it is. So the General is going to be in this multiple HP unit. They're very effective in melee, but of course the main attraction comes with their missile attacks, which are of course that sort of flaming shotgun-like effect almost. Obviously very effective, but time will tell whether or not they can actually get into the right position to fully lay down their damage, because if they can't, they may prove to be a bit of a waste here. Over here we see some Loke Scion Rim holding down the centre of the line here, of course, the best of the Runic Spears. Very heavily armoured, of course, very tough to break down. Don't necessarily kill units very quickly, but they will still be a very good centre to the army here. Spread very wide as well, which is good to see, and we've got a full line here of Loka Flag Rim, which are going to be very good against Cardlin. Most of Cardlin's better units do tend to rely a little bit on their armour for their survivability, so the Flag Rim are going to trade pretty effectively with those kind of units. And in behind them we've got even more AP in the shape of these Loka Gamp Rim, of course, the Halberds, which will, this is a very well constructed line. Of course, we have seen very recently Rune doing quite badly against factions like Mirkwood when they bring their AP core, but against Cardlin it should work out. And then back here we've got some E-Strong clansmen with the full array of upgrades. They've got 2 levels of armour upgrades, so they'll be pretty difficult to carve their way through, and of course they add a lot more numbers, so a very layered front line here. Then on the other side another unit of E-Strong crossbows, and then over here we can see the ambush, which a lot of Kuro's strength is honestly tied up in these 3 units over here. We've got the Balchoth Sapphire Bladesman, the other quite unique, high tier, very expensive skirmisher that Rune can bring. Of course they are one of few units in the game to have the throne trait, so they can still be a hard counter to things like Mumakil. But of course their missile damage being very high, and they're honestly not bad in melee either. And then they are backed up by the AP Carmel's Shadow Guard. So yeah, a lot of the strength is going to be bound up in these units over here, and whether or not they can lay down their effectiveness later on in the battle. Very little in the way of mounted units, so Rune is obviously going to be a lot more defensive here, hoping to use their skirmishes to outlast whatever Cardlin can throw at them. And that's bold, because Rules usually goes pretty skirmisher heavy with a lot of polearms, pike and shot. At the front here, some Greenwatch Garrison archers, so again it's going to be a real tussle between the 2 lower tier archers, but neither is really going to get the upper hand. Really, it's just going to be a dead rubber, and Rune is certainly not pitching most of their hopes on their archers, and it doesn't look as though Cardlin are either, to be honest with you. But in true Rules fashion, the second line is going to be made up of these very cheap Greenwatch Garrison spears, very good tar pit, but again, a lot of Rune's strength is not bound up in their sort of basic archers here, so their tar pitting ability is probably just going to be a sort of side note here. The Wardens of Tirn Gorthad are just going to be in the middle of the line as well, keeping everything in check with their inspiration bonuses. I think actually, yeah, they've been spread very thin, so a lot of spears. Only one pike unit, which is odd for rules, from what I've seen in the past. And Miniskirith sharpshooters on both sides as well, which double as AP infantry. So they should be able to trade relatively evenly with some of Rune's more armor-focused units. They'll obviously be very handy when trying to carve their way through that great number of Eastron clansmen. But of course, the crossbows, they are a little bit more expensive than the runic ones, but of course they are of higher quality as well. And then going even more in with the crossbows. Ironically, these crossbows will actually not be too effective. Well, they will be effective if they can get them into the right position, but the lack of cavalry from Rune may well make these crossbows a little bit more difficult to use with regards to the positioning. But the Minotaur, Roman Guardians, of course, probably well, other than the sort of more specialty crossbow units like the Blacklock Engineers and the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen, of all the crossbows that have got basic ammunition, shall we say, the Minotaur, Roman Guardians are probably the strongest, mainly because of their ability to act as very good polearms in melee. Some mercenary guildsmen here, just to form up a bit of line infantry here as the sort of last line in, which might come into a bit of, well, might come into play because a lot of Cardlan's army here at the front, a lot of these spears are not going to be good in melee. Melee infantry advantage certainly belongs to Rune with the forces they have brought. However, the cavalry advantage is squarely in Cardlan's favour. The Tharbad Riders with their brutal charge, of course, the full charge bonus of 20, the cheapest unit in the game to have that, I believe, but of course they do suffer in other areas. And then backing them up we have the Dunedain Commanders, which are a little bit more sturdy, and the Royal Court of House Thorondor, so multiple HP unit here. Be interesting to see how this works out. If the cavalry uncovers the hidden runic units, this could end very, very quickly. We shall see. Just having a look at how both sides have formed up here. This is actually, initially, I think Rune will be quite happy with this again. A lot of this is going to come down to whether or not those hidden runic units can actually lay down their effectiveness over the long course of the battle, because 16,000 frames is a pretty decent amount of time for a battle like this. But yeah, I think that the initial skirmish, I'm not sure whether Rules is just going to be able to rely... It's very similar actually to the last battle we saw between them, where Rules tried to use his skirmishes to good effect, but I'm not sure whether he's going to be able to sit back here. I think what he's going to have to do, as we actually see the Gwathlo trackers come into play, so he does have a little bit more in terms of skirmish power, I suppose, but again, these guys are, as I said before, the budget rangers, the Tesco value rangers, as it were, because they don't have body piercing. They can hide, of course, but they're going to be really dreadful in a skirmish fight if they get zeroed in on. Interesting to see how this works out. Obviously, this cavalry is also going to be a big factor in this battle. If it can get some good charges off, then we could see a lot of Rune's positions start to break. But honestly, these Eastron hunters, they could be thrown under the bus here, just so that these Eastron crossbowmen can get a nice shot into these Tharbad Riders. I mean, they're going to charge in here, but those Eastron crossbows, they're going to fire unless these Cardlan Lancers can get out of here. I mean, Cardlan are going all in on this area. They're trying to push through. What this might do, actually, is cripple Rune's ability to sit back and try and skirmish with Cardlan, which would give Rules the rights to try and be a little bit more defensive here. But he needs to really be careful, because if those Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen get a hold of some of these cavalry units, they're going to be in for a really bad time. And Cardlan's cavalry is not the most resilient. I mean, in a sustained melee, you can see here the Dunedain Commanders really biting off more than they can chew. There's flag room and sail room all around them, trying to get to those crossbows. That's maybe a little bit too gung-ho. When all is said and done, they will inflict enough casualties on the archers to force Rune to come forwards, but I'm not sure whether that's going to be enough to justify it in the late game. The Royal Court of House Thorondor are even shaken at this point, going far too deep into the lines for my liking. It was very bold, and time will tell whether securing the ranged advantage will come into play. Those Dunedain Commanders have come back. Here come the chariots as well. The chariots coming in, and actually the Royal Court of House Thorondor broken. These chariots are going ham, firing at these Tharbad Riders on the retreat. I imagine the chariots are probably going to retreat back into their infantry lines. In fact, it looks like they're going for the Gwathlo trackers over here, which is going to be devastating on this unit of archers. They're not really the most resilient at the best of times, but here we can see just a nice ambush here. The Greenwatch Garrison footmen coming in, and these pikes will wreak havoc with the runic war chariots, and this is a very expensive unit to lose. And of course, it would appear that this time we see the more traditional fate of the chariots rather than last time where they were extremely effective. I think, well, they're going to get into these Gwathlo trackers, but that's going to really be the only unit they bring down, and the Gwathlo trackers are significantly cheaper than the runic war chariots. But again, The fate of the skirmish fight is still going to be rather interesting. That was a bit of an interesting drop in frames there. Obviously the Guatho trackers are pretty garbage in melee. Very lightweight. Runic War Chariots are going to cycle on out. The Cardinal Cavalry has all returned from routing. The Tharbad Riders never routed, I think, actually, but well, these chariots are going to need to get into melee before these crossbows hit them, and they do, actually. And they're going to go right down this line. I mean, this is going to be an absolutely brutal charge through these Minas Tirith sharpshooters. But I think this is probably going to be the end of the Runic War Chariots. The unit models have split, which essentially means that you're going to lose control of them. You might get one or two of them to escape, but nice charge there. So the chariots probably just about paid for themselves, given their rough start. And the Royal Court of House Thorondor now also suffering a couple more casualties. These chariots, more resilient perhaps than I would give them credit for, but now the polearms and the spears helping to bring them down with their anti-cav bonus. And that's going to be it for the chariots. There's one more chariot in here, and that's where they go. The frame drops was actually the fault of the chariots. That's interesting. So the cavalry for Cardlin has taken some losses. The chariots are gone for Rune, in addition to losses from the skirmishers on both sides. Hard to tell who's got the upper hand of these early game engagements so far. The chariots are an expensive unit to lose entirely, but they did do quite a lot of damage. Both sides have harassed the other side's skirmishers pretty effectively. But I would say Rune are probably in a healthier spot, because if it does come down to a pure infantry engagement, they're going to have the advantage. We'll see if there's some Dunedain Rangers ready to swing in to save the day. There might be some hidden units of bandits and thieves of Tharbad as well, of course, which again would be pretty clutch. It would put both sides to be relatively even, to be honest, if I knew the content of what Cardlin... I would put money on the fact that Rules has got more units hidden, but if it's Dunedain Rangers, I would be less enthusiastic about his chances than I would be if it was something like Thieves of Tharbad. My word, what is going on with the frame drops here? Very strange indeed. But yeah, this Runic infantry corps is pretty strong. The Flagrim have taken some losses from the cavalry, but ultimately they've probably done enough to be cost effective so far. And of course they've got plentiful Eastron clansmen to back up the line where they look a little bit more vulnerable. What's going on over here? So it looks like we're going to be sort of settling into a little bit more of a traditional skirmish fight, which neither side is really going to inflict any grievous wounds on the enemy army with this sort of play. Just sort of going through the motions here with both units of very low tier archers. Whoever wins that will maybe gain a slight advantage. Well, hello, there's Greenwatch Garrison footmen that have revealed themselves back here. I don't think they were intended to be revealed. I think that Rules was trying to hide them for later on, but the crossbowmen unwittingly found them. And when they're out of formation like this, the Eastron clansmen will gobble up more casualties. And also, if the crossbowmen are able to get some volleys into these pikemen, I'm not sure why the frames are dropping in a 1v1. I assume the chariot corpses are not helping matters. These Eastron hunters being focused down. So yeah, the skirmish fight is going to go in favour of Rules, I would say. And he still has that cav advantage, but I don't know. Those crossbows are still going to be a big part of the battle, I think. And it's going to make it very difficult for Rules to use his cavalry to full effect. These pikemen are running for the hills at this point. Interesting choice of flanking unit, I must say, the pikeman. Any unit, when it attacks another unit in the rear, is obviously going to be effective, but obviously pikes, more traditionally, are used as a front line. The cavalry is coming over here to lend a hand as well. Now, he needs to be very careful to stay clear of the Eastron crossbowmen, because if he loses his cavalry, that's going to be a big potential ace in the hole that he's going to lose for the late game. What is going on over here? Eastron crossbowmen swinging out wide, with the support of the Locus Scion Rim. These Eastron hunters still firing away. Yeah, you can see the Greenwatch Garrison archers going to have just the better of this. The assistance of those Guatho trackers, pretty important. It's going to be interesting. We are, of course, into the final 10,000 frames now. But I do slightly worry about the context of all of these infantry, because the Greenwatch Garrison spearmen are not good in melee. Their ability to act as a tar pit is very good, but they suffer for this with their melee stats. They are probably one of the least effective melee combatants in terms of damage in the entire game. The Guatho trackers are moving forward, but maybe a little bit too close to the runic lines. These strong crossbowmen could really do a hefty amount of damage with just a single volley. And all of the Eastron hunters are also focusing their fire on the Gwathlo trackers, which are a little bit more of a priority target than the Greenwatch garrison archers. I mean, I don't think Kuro is going to fall for this ploy. These pikemen are very clearly here. And trying to cycle around the back with that cavalry is going to end in tears, I think. Because the crossbows are here, and the Royal Court of House Thorondor, based on the losses they've already taken, I mean, they are going to get in here. But you wouldn't really fancy their chances, seeing as the losses they've already taken probably means their HP is already gone. Those Loka Flagrim are going to chase those Greenwatch Garrison footmen to the ends of the earth, which is dangerous. The Cardland cavalry could isolate them a bit. The Gwathlo trackers are getting very close to the runic lines, which is going to allow some clansmen to come out and meet them, and they will have by far the better of that engagement. The Royal Court of House Thorondor did break. That's unfortunate for them. Those pikes, Kuro's going to need to keep a mental note of them. More cavalry being cycled over here now. What's that in the distance over there? More Greenwatch Garrison footmen. So he deployed a lot of hidden pikes all over the map, which is a very interesting choice. It's something which, you know, very few pikemen in the game can actually do. Now that crossbows are getting involved in a skirmish fight, which, you know, the runic crossbows of all units is probably the least effective at that sort of thing. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that Rules has brought so much in the way of pikemen. But to use them as a sort of hidden auxiliary force, like he usually saves archers and the like for that, and sort of layers his archer line to really wear down his opponent and then force them to enter a melee fight, which they then cannot win because of the casualties they've already taken. Eastron clansmen are going to take a charge from the Tharbad Riders, who are actually still fairly healthy. They've taken a lot of losses, but they do have more men in the unit at the start, so Eastron clansmen taking losses are actually taking some friendly fire as well, but the Tharbad Riders also getting nailed in the back by the Eastron crossbowmen, and at this point these pikes have been caught in melee. And the Flagrim, they're also going to be backed up by these Eastron clansmen. And the Greenwatch Garrison footmen are going to be caught out of formation, and they're ultimately going to be overwhelmed and destroyed. Both sides probing one another, but so far it's mainly been Cardland trying to find ways in and around the runic lines. Greenwatch Garrison archers still having the better of the skirmish fight, it must be said, but again, probably going to be largely inconclusive because they're going to have drained most of their ammo supply going after the Eastron hunters. The Tharbad Riders actually able to get in and around all of this infantry, and they're going to charge into the Eastron crossbowman. Good target. Very weak. They need to keep moving, because if they get caught at any point, they're going to suffer badly. And at this point they're going to get counter-charged, and it's likely that they're going to lose a few more unit models here, and they're not going to be able to sustain this sort of thing for much longer. Ooh, that lag. And the crossbowmen are going to survive, which of course means their effectiveness is going to be maintained, and they are routing actually. How are things going in this fight over here? Elsewhere it's still just a pure skirmish fight. See, the Flagrim actually taking some pretty substantial losses, so this isn't a total loss for Rules over here, but I'm actually quite surprised that these Eastron clansmen are not getting in and around the back here to finish off these Greenwatch Garrison footmen. Pikes are terrible when they've had their flanks exposed and their formation is being bypassed. Very low stats. Eastron clansmen here just sort of waiting. There's a lot of this runic infantry, and there's also the Gamp Rim, which Cardland do have pikes, but not enough pikes to just completely blanket the line with, I don't think. And the Gamp Rim are going to make it very difficult for the likes of the Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen to be very effective. And the Greenwatch Garrison Archers, I think, are out of ammunition at this point. They've pulled out their swords. Gwathlo trackers moving over to the flank. I think, yes, they still have their bows out, so they do still have ammunition, which is important. I think they're probably going to try and get some fire into the Gamp Rim if they can help it. The Scion Rim are heavily armoured enough and shielded enough that I'm probably not going to have too much joy at shooting at them. There's these Greenwatch Garrison footmen over here as well, another pike unit with most of Rune's long-range skirmishers out of ammunition. They are advancing forward, but they are being firing squad. The firing squad of Rune here shooting them on the approach. Not getting too many kills, however. There isn't many of these crossbows left, and these pikes are charging forward. But soon, a lot of this runic infantry is going to be freed up. Fairly soon, what is that in the distance? Dunedain Rangers, so again, Cardland do have more in the way of skirmishes, but I'm not entirely convinced that it's going to serve him too well here. I mean, he does have a lot of crossbows, so again, it is in the balance, but I think I would have preferred to see a bit more in the way of infantry to deal with all of this runic infantry, to be honest with you. He could definitely still pull it out, though. Those crossbows, in particular the Minotaur Roman Guardians, are going to be a very tough nut to crack in the late game in particular, if Kuro is not able to get around their phalanx formation. But speaking of phalanx, rules committing forward individual units of pikemen is not really going to help them, because it's going to be an easy task really for Rune to get in behind them and attack them in the flank, and I think he realises that at this point, but it might even be too late. I mean, they might break, they'll probably come back anyway, there is enough of them, but ultimately that wasn't really the most effective attack forward. The Dunedain commanders still running around, the one unit of cavalry that Cardland still have left, and honestly with cycle charging they can finish off this pocket of runic infantry over here and then potentially get access to the runic backlines. But if they were unfortunate enough to hover into view of the Balchoth Sapphire Bladesmen, they would very soon know about it. What's going on with the Gwathlo trackers, I wonder? Here that these Eastron hunters are out of ammunition and they are just going to be committed to melee, or at the very least just going to chase off these Gwathlo trackers. Doesn't look like Rules has noticed. I mean, this is obviously going to be a real wet noodle fight in melee, but all Kuro wants is to prevent these archers from laying down their ammunition onto his lines for as long as possible, and sending over a throwaway unit of archers that is already out of ammunition is obviously going to be a solid move. What is going on over here? These Gwathlo trackers have been committed to melee, pulling out their axes in melee, so their survivability is low, but based on the fact they're using axes, they should have higher than average attack stats for a unit of this type, which is admittedly still not saying much. I'm unsure why this lag is continuing. Oh yeah, those Gwathlo trackers didn't stand a chance when the reinforcements came back and they lost their bottle and routed. That's something which quite often happens to Cardland, but now Cardland is going to advance forward with their primary infantry corps, probably thinking that Rune is going to be overly reliant on their halberdiers at this point. These strong hunters actually causing the Gwathlo trackers to waver, so definitely not a melee powerhouse. There are pikes in here though. There are those crossbows and the mercenary guildsmen, which are not a half bad unit. The Dunedain commanders are still lurking, but this concentration of runic hidden units, and I think Kuro is actually trying to reform his lines over here so that he can then come in from the side with the Sapphire Bladesmen and the Carmel Shadow Guard, which would be devastating, I think, because really the only thing that could save Rules them would be his Dunedain Rangers, but I'm not entirely sure they could chew their way through all of these units. And really all that it would take is those any sort of unit to get into them. That lag is really rather strange, and I'm not sure what's causing it. Never had this problem before with 1v1s. Dunedain commanders heading out to the flanks. There's a pocket of runic infantry here which is probably not going to make it back actually, and that flag rim is going to try and get into the heart and soul of the matter over here. They're going to go for something. Well, these clansmen are going to be recharged by Dunedain commanders, which is certainly not going to help them, and in fact I think at this point Kuro is just going to advance forward, so the ambush is maybe not going to be quite as lethal as maybe he had hoped, but oh, hello. Are they going to choose this moment to reveal themselves? Eastron crossmen going to get charged by Dunedain commanders, but the melee fight is about to begin, and some of these clansmen are sort of getting around the flank, and the Eastron clansmen are far better than the Greenwatch Garrison spearmen in melee. In a trash fight, a militia fight, the Eastron clansmen will do very well against most things. Here comes the runic hidden units, the Carmel Shadow Guard and the Balchoth Sapphire Bladesmen. We shall see who is victorious here, and of course there are still those Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen. I'm not entirely sure how well they will actually do in this situation. They don't have the easiest shot. Firing in, that is again some crunchy lag. They're actually going after the Greenwatch Garrison footmen, I think. They're carving their way through the entire Cardland army, to be fair. But the Carmel Shadow Guard are going to be a very important tool here. The Gamp Rim are sort of blanketing the front lines. The over-reliance... Ugh, what is going on? Well, the Dunedain commanders are now dead. The Balchoth Sapphire Bladesmen are to blame for that. But I would worry that the over-reliance on the Greenwatch Garrison spearmen for the numbers in the Cardland infantry line might hurt them here. Because they're going to be absolutely no match for the runic forces on the front line. The Gamprim, it says, defeat seems certain, but as soon as it starts to bite in, there are some Miniskirith and sharpshooters back here, which could potentially...
Oh, cruel fate! We have lost half our warriors.
Interesting. Cardland definitely have the better of the percentage game at the present moment in time, but then the cavalry is gone. And the Carmel Shadow Guard are going to get in and around those Greenwatch Garrison footmen. I think Rune will be okay here if we just have a look on high at the front line. The Greenwatch Garrison spearmen are going to really start to struggle against the runic infantry. And then there's the Balchos Sapphire Bladesmen with their javelins. You know, they're obviously going to try and target the Menotar Romen Guardians, I would imagine. This side is going more in favour of Cardland. There are those Dunedain Rangers as well, which can rack up a hell of a body count. And they are going to be going after the Carmel Shadow Guard, which are going to be pretty vulnerable to this sort of thing. Oof. I apologise for the lag. I'm not entirely sure what's causing this. Maybe my PC's just wilting in the heat, which would be worrying. Yeah, the Carmel Shadow Guard polishing off that unit of pikes on the flank. When their backlines are not secured, basic pikes like that are just going to fold like wet tissue paper. And the Balchos Sapphire Bladesmen throwing their javelins into the Miniskirith and sharpshooters, actually. Interesting choice. Crossbow superiority certainly belongs to Cardland at this point in time, but whether they can actually keep them safe, I'm unsure. Gamprim are crunching in from the flanks with the support of the Clansmen and the Carmel Shadow Guard. Now the Shadow Guard are attracting the full attention of the Dunedain Rangers, to be fair, so I wouldn't expect them to last too much longer. It's going to be close, actually. The Wardens of Tirn Gorthard have certainly done a lot of heavy lifting on the front line, but over here you can see the Scion Rim also causing a bit of a collapse for Cardland over here in their centre. The Eastron crossbowmen still have melee, still have ammunition, I should say. The Carmel Shadow Guard getting into melee with more of the crossbows. Yeah, Rules is going to have to rely on his Dunedain Rangers to save the day in a big way here. He might be going after the Sapphire Bladesmen, which would be understandable. But honestly, you probably need to try and deal with those Gwathlo trackers routed as soon as they touch the runic units. Now you can see the Scion Rim swamping forward. I think Rune have got this in the bag at this point. Based on the amount of time left, I don't think Cardland are going to have what it takes to turn this around. The Sapphire Bladesmen are very accomplished melee fighters as well. They are being targeted by ranged fire, but at this point the Cardland front lines have buckled. The Eastron Hunters are actually going to be victorious over the Gwathlo trackers on the flank as well. So eventually the Dunedain Rangers will be caught, and while Cardland, well actually they're not even winning over there. Probably attracting the attention of crossbows. Oof. That lag though. Just waiting for my PC to burst into flames. Miniskirith and sharpshooters still alive. They're trying to get out melee, but at this point, Cardland's, when Cardland start getting overrun like this, chain routing is kind of inevitable, in the same way that the Orcs tend to collapse when things start going against them in a big way. That's going to be true for Cardland as well. And I feel as though, again, this does show that it doesn't more skirmishes doesn't necessarily mean more success. I think Kuro definitely brought the exact sort of army to deal with an increased level of skirmishes. He had the right tools to sort of deal with cavalry as well, and of course he had the ace up his sleeve in the late game with the Carmel Shadow Guard, Balchos Sapphire Blades, and with all their AP, they were always going to be a good choice against all of the units which Cardland tend to use in the late game. Greenwatch Garrison footmen victorious on the flank, but it's going to be a hollow victory in the end because they're not going to have the numbers to cover every eventuality. I suppose they could form up some sort of makeshift Skiltron formation and try and make life as awkward as possible. But in the end it wouldn't really help them, especially not when the crossbows still have got ammunition. Dunedain Rangers collapsing. This is going to be the last stand, I would imagine. Taking crossbow fire, actually. Some smouldering corpses. You can see Cardland's units are running for the hills. Eastron Hunters victorious on the flank. Hard fought victory there in their own little battle. The enemy general has broken. I'm not sure what unit he was in. I think it was probably in the unit of Wardens of Tirn Gorthard, because he wasn't in the cavalry, and the Wardens were very much ingrained in the front line.
Fit him with
Yeah,
the old
he was.
women where he belongs.
Thank you, based Mongol announcer. So yeah, this is going to be a solid victory for the armies of Rune.
The dead lie around us, and we still walk tall. That makes us the victors for today.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought it was my PC making a really weird noise, but it's not. It's actually just the fan on the other side of the room. I'm just an idiot. But regardless, Kuro with a hard-fought victory there. Very close. He was behind for a long time in the percentage scores of that fight, but in the end I feel as though he did bring the tools. I think he knew what kind of army Rules was going to bring, and indeed most of the time I've seen Rules play, he does bring a similar sort of army most of the time, although this time he hid most of his pikes around the map, which I think probably would have been more effective had Kuro gone for a more cavalry focused army, which Rune definitely can do, but he went for no cavalry at all other than those chariots, and in the end the kills those chariots got may have proved to have been key. We'll never know. Having a look at some of these casualty numbers, Dragon's Wrath Crossmen getting a decent amount of kills over the course of the battle, so they were in the end a good choice. The Sapphire Blazemen and the Shadow Guard doing okay for themselves, but in the end they were only really committed in the late game to really hammer the point home. The Gamperim doing very well on the front line, as they were always going to. The reliance on those Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen, very good at absorbing arrow fire. They are really not very good in melee against other infantry at all. They can be useful for zoning out cav as well, but in this situation they really didn't have what it takes going up against Eastron Clansmen and Loke Gamperim on the front line. Scion Rim doing okay, but they were always there for their tankiness rather than the amount of kills they got. Eastron Hunters getting 247, that was the most in the runic army, so that was pretty good, but again that was mostly on the similar sort of units. I would imagine actually that it would be a similar story in Cardland. The unit with the higher skills was probably one of their archers as well, but in the end that wasn't where the battle was won or lost. Where it was the infantry, and Rune definitely had the advantage there with a lot of AP and a lot of good unit synergy going on there, and in the end an over-reliance on cheap units to try and hold the front line, hidden units to try and get around the flanks, and again trying to go for a layered skirmish approach in this situation didn't work out for Rules, even if it often does. So yeah, very nice and very well played 1v1, and Rune victorious over Cardland. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which will probably be the Rohan faction overview, and then hopefully I'll be moving on to the Dol Amroth battle. But yeah, I hope you'll join me for those things.